me introduce myself. Thank you so much for those who have joined us this evening. My name is Shaniqua Risher. I finished at UT with a bachelor's degree in government in 1998. From there, I went on to Dallas Baptist University to get my master's in Christian education, where I finished in 2006. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, this is the second in our series, Black in America. This one will be focusing on race and economics, building wealth. Our first one was race and mental health, surviving the struggle. And our next one is on race and equality. And then we also we're planning an encore presentation, but more details to come on that one. Just a couple different things when it comes to housekeeping for those who are on the webinar. As you heard Kevin saying earlier, we want to make sure that you are on grid view. So please, if you can do that, if by any chance, if your computer is not showing that, go ahead and put yourself on grid view. I did have a couple of friends from last week text me this week to make sure that I announced that we are not able to see you. So it's okay if you're at home, if you're casual dressed, we can't see you, neither can anyone else in the audience. So please make sure that you're aware of that. The layout for this evening is going to be about a 90-minute conversation overall. In the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and start and introduce our moderator as well as our two panelists. And then from there, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator for her to do the panel questions. From there, they're going to talk for probably about 55 minutes. And then I will jump back on and facilitate the Q&A. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, go ahead and make note of that. You can go ahead and put it in the Q&A box that you'll see on your screen, and then I'll be able to pull those as well. Some of them may be answered during the panel discussion, but for the most part, the bulk of them I will ask at the end during the Q&A session, which will take approximately about 25 minutes. This webinar will cap at about 100 individuals. We've had more than 100 RSVP, so we do expect for it to fill up. If you are aware that it has over 100 individuals in it and you know of anyone else that is looking to join, we have shared it with our Facebook page through the Black X Students of Texas Facebook group and page. So it's there. And we encourage you, if you're on Facebook, to share it with your friends as well. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce everyone. And I am so excited about this. I have personal and professional relationships with each of the individuals that you see here today with you. And let me go ahead and get started with our moderator. And again, I have a professional relationship with Sammetria. She is a wonderful attorney that I can personally attest to, that she has done some work for me as I was a client of hers with my business. So Sammetria L. Goodson is an attorney who works with photographers, influencers, artists, musicians, designers, makers, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, arts organizations, cultural institutions, storytellers, and creatives. She focuses her practices on copyright, trademark, business, and nonprofit formation, contracts, transactional work, licensing, outside general counsel services, and more. She brings her experience in corporate marketing and sales, a 2-year judicial clerkship, litigation practice, and transactional work with creatives to her practice at Goodson Law. Sammetria helps business owners and founders establish businesses, protect intellectual property, and monetize the fruits of their creativity. She is an IP counsel to an app-based startup, serves as outside general counsel to growing companies, and is a trusted strategic advisor. Sammetria holds a BBA in marketing from the McCombs School of Business and a BA in art history from the College of Fine Arts, both from the University of Texas at Austin. She's also a proud graduate of Temple University Beasley School of Law. Sammetria currently serves on the UT College of Fine Arts Advisory Council, Texans for the Arts. And most recently, Sammetria served as the 2020 commencement speaker for the UT Austin College of Fine Arts. She is licensed to practice law in Texas and Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Sammetria.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Our next panelist is a friend that I have known since the first day that I stepped on the yard at UT in 1994, and that is Erika Brown. She began her professional career after graduating from the University of Texas with a BBA in finance. She studied at Mexico's premier university in Monterrey and obtained an MBA from the University of North Texas. Erika spent time building brands at beauty powerhouses, but soon learned that technology is the space where she wanted to have an impact. That has been seen through her recent work at MoneyGram and Capital One, where she drove online money transfer and auto finance experiences for consumers around the world. From the time she was a child, she vowed that no one would know more about money than her. Now that she is in financial services industry, both her profession and passions revolve around money. Erika capitulated her professional knowledge and passion to create Brokish, a podcast dedicating to talk about being broke and Black in America. Here she talks about all of the unbelievable ish that America has done to Black people to keep us in this brokish state. The podcast reveals how Blacks have been bamboozled in ways that personal finance tips and traditional financial literacy cannot fix. She and her co host share candidly about money, wealth building, and the financial urban legends that need to die. Welcome and thank you so much, Erika.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you guys.
Yay, we're happy to have you. And then finally, rounding out our panel is my friend Kevin Knight, who I love and adore. And Kevin is the founder and CEO of Urban Events Global, a travel company of professional African American adventure seekers. Kevin attended the University of Texas and received his Bachelor of Economics and Business degree. During his time at the University of Texas, Kevin was involved in student government and became a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. After earning his bachelor's degree, Kevin began his professional career in financial advising, consulting, and investments and advanced quickly in this fast paced industry. In addition to obtaining his bachelor's degree, Kevin also obtained a certification in certified financial planning from Southern Methodist University. During his professional planning career, Kevin held positions such as Associate Vice President at Pravasi Capital Partners and Vice President of Capital Markets National Accounts at Ascendant Capital LLC. In 2016, after 16 years of for financial services, Kevin decided it was time to pursue his passion of entrepreneurship and his love for adventure and travel with others by starting his company, Urban Events Global. And welcome and thank you so much for joining us this evening, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sammetria, I will go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Again, we are excited about spending time together this evening to discuss race and economics. And before we get started, because I'm an attorney and I nerd out about legal issues, I wanted to wish everyone a happy Civil Rights Act of 1964 day. It was passed on this day in 1964, and it's a desegregation act. And one of the things that act was meant to do was to level the playing field in terms of economics for Black people specifically, so and others broadly speaking. So happy Civil Rights Act of 1964 day. Erika, we'll start with you with just a lead-in question to help give us some context around our discussion tonight. So we know on your podcast, you discuss issues of economics and the Black community. We see, though, in current broad media that there are a lot of discussions about race economics, the state of economics for the Black community. From my perspective, there's a lot more coverage in the major publications about this. Obviously, we discussed it in the community, but what do you think about this coverage, and why do you think we're having a broader conversation now?
Well, I think we have to be having the broader conversation just because we've seen with all of the political events that have been happening, all of the things happening in our community, as we see all of the things related to whether that's violence against Black men and women in the streets, or, you know, just all the things going on around COVID and everything, right? That has really brought race to the forefront. And so we can't not be having the conversation. I think many times in America, it's easy to just turn a blind eye to a thing. I don't see it. But now when you have people who are protesting in the streets, and when you have, in my opinion, when you have sometimes attacks on capital and property, then people are like, we need to talk about a thing, because now there's destruction at play, right? Now there's money that we need to deal with. And so I think really sort of the hits on the things that people protect, and in this country, the things that people protect are capital. I think that that's one of the reasons that's brought it to the forefront. So I think people have had to talk about it. I'm finding that a lot of the conversations are really shallow. And so I'm still hoping that we can have some conversations that lead to transformation. That's really what I'm hoping.
And in terms of the shallow nature of the conversations versus the conversations you want to have and the ones you have on your podcast, what are the differences? What makes you state that the conversations are shallow?
Yeah, so sometimes it feels like people are just wanting to get together and talk, but not really challenging one another. So I think it's one thing for us to say, let's have a forum where we can have people with different points of view, and that's great. But we've got to challenge those points of view, because if we truly want this to be the movement and not just the moment, it can't just be us talking about stuff. So we've got to be willing to learn some new things. We've got to be willing to hear from people we might have not been willing to hear from before. But we have to be willing to move. We have to be willing to sacrifice. What are we willing to give up? And I think we all can play a role in that. But I don't just want to talk about stuff anymore. I'm kind of tired of that.
I'm with you. And hopefully we'll get to some solutions in our conversation today. But the conversation is about Black wealth. It's about economics. And with some of the conversations that we're having, even globally, we're talking about incarceration rates. We're talking about fractures in the educational system. It seems like there's a lot of conversations where people are trying to figure out, well, what is going on with economics and race for Black community? And they're pointing to different things. So Kevin, I have a next question is for you in terms of this conversation about building Black wealth. What do you think is the greatest barrier to building Black wealth? And before you answer that question, I'll have a lead in for you. When we say wealth, what are we talking about? So for instance, for me, when I say wealth, I don't necessarily think of depreciable assets because I represent art collectors. I think of things like art collections as being an indicator of wealth, real estate, things like that. So if you would answer that two-part question, what do we mean when we say wealth? And then also, what is the greatest barrier to building Black wealth?
Yeah, no, good question. I think I don't know if there's one great barrier. I think there are several things that are hindering us from moving forward. But I think I want to start off by saying there are a lot of things that we're doing great as a community as well. But one of the things is going to be education. That's overall, and I think that's just common sense. It starts with education, and then you move into having access to some of the resources and having fair access to some of those resources, and then sharing the access to that information. So I think once we get the information, once we know where to find the information and actually use that information, I think we'll be able to overcome some of the hurdles and some of the fake hurdles that may be out there as well. One of the things I kind of want to go back to that Erika touched on, just because I don't think we went too far into it, was like the shallow conversations that are being held. And I see both sides of it. And I think it's a generational thing. I think there are some shallow conversations being held that are like some of the louder voices that we hear. But I do think behind the scenes, there are some more in-depth policy type conversations, because for as many voices that you see discuss some of the shallower topics, you'll also see people talk about, okay, let's go out there and vote. Let's vote locally. Let's make sure that we're having the in-depth conversations. I know we have them in smaller groups. I think some of those people just don't share those voices on social media. So they're not getting the same bandwidth as some of the louder, shallower voices out there. I do want to tip my hat to the younger generation out there. I think the younger generation is actually doing extremely well with getting the word out there. I think for Erika, myself, some of the people on the call, we come from a generation of what's that?
Watch yourself.
I think we come from a generation where we've seen a lot of this. Like, for example, I mentioned this before, the Rodney King situation. Like we've seen that happen. We've seen the riots. We've seen we've seen a lot of this before. Just so happens now everyone has a camera in their pocket. So now we're able to videotape it and show it. And it's no longer he say, she say, or my word against their word. It's like, hey, I can show you that this actually happened. So I think the conversations are happening better than they've ever happened before. The type of change that will come of it, we shall see. I think also big picture, I don't want everyone to think that our vote can be bought or sold, and nor do I want everyone to think that we're all voting with the same political party, because to think that you can classify one group of people into just one party, left or right, is silly. Personally, I hold views on both sides. I can say I hold, from a business perspective, I may have 60% Republican views. From a social standpoint, I may have 70% Democratic views. And so it really depends on the candidate. I can honestly say I voted for both Republican and Democrat in the past, but it depends on whether it was locally or nationally.
And in terms of some of those in-depth conversations, though, if you're at liberty to share, like what would you give or cite as an example of a more in-depth conversation? Because I think this point is important, the difference between maybe what is being amplified, which may just be more conversation, versus in-depth discussions. Could you share some examples of those?
Sure. One example would be a conversation I had with a family member who we definitely have completely opposing views, from whether it's pro-life or left versus right. But it all boils down to, we both want to see the advancement of African Americans, right? And so that's our foundation. How we get to the end result, we vary on how we get there, right? But I think it all boils down to, I'm going to start with education again and voting. As it relates to voting and understanding who you're voting for, what you're voting for, what legislative laws, like for example, you started off the call by saying, nerding out on our history. I think a lot of people don't understand our history. I had an intern of mine many years ago in corporate America who didn't understand racism. And he happened to be a Caucasian young male. And I had to think about it, and I understood completely why he had no clue about racism or slavery, based on the way it was taught to him, but also based on where he was from. He was never in a position where he would see racism, where he would see Black people not being allowed to get into certain clubs, or, he was a white guy. So why would he see
education was important?
Right. So I think it boils down to education, what you're exposed to. A lot of us, or all of us, went to the University of Texas, where a lot of the Caucasian classmates of ours, there may have only been 3, 4, 5 Black people in their whole entire school. So everything we did in class, or the athletes did, represented what they thought of as African Americans. So a lot of it's just education. I have some people that I used to work with in corporate America on my Facebook page that have sent me some DMs and asked me about certain things, because they never realized while I was in corporate America that I was faced with some of those same issues. And so I just had to explain to them, this is what actually happened. This is what went down. This is what goes on in our community. In all fairness, a lot of it's education.
And I'm gonna throw that question back to you, actually, also, Erika, in terms of the greatest barrier to building wealth for our community, and any sort of in-depth or beyond surface level explanation of that. What are your thoughts there? So Kevin says education is one of the main things. How about you? What do you think?
Things I never thought I'd say. So I think I agree with Kevin that that it's way more complex than a single issue, right? So I can't distill it down to a single issue. And so this is what I mean by that. If I think about being Black in America, and let's start with housing as an example, right? And so we start with housing, and then we talk about, the Fair Housing Act and all of the things that was supposed to do, right? And we know that didn't result in that. And we know that we have a history of restrictive covenants and redlining and all of these things that have meant for us that the homeownership rates you basically see for Black people today are pretty much the same as you saw in 1968, right? So that has not improved. And so then you think about how housing is then tied to education and how schools get funded. So in many parts of this country, we've said, you know what, we're gonna base how many resources your kids get in school based on where you live, right? we're going to tie that together. And then not only are we going to tie that together, but then also, if more than 50% of y'all live in a place, then we're going to say that your homes are worth 40% less just because all y'all together. And we don't like that. Okay, so then you're like, okay, well, my house is worth less and my kids have schools that are less well resourced, right? And so then they're dealing with that. And then when your kids go to school, then we know that there is over policing and over criminalization of Black girls and boys in schools. And then so your kids are set up for that. Then you have your kids and they basically, of course, they're just moving through the school to prison pipeline. And so as that happens, then not only that, but for African Americans who are sentenced, their sentences are usually 30% higher than the white people who are sentenced, right? And then their sentences, their sentences are longer, but then also the conviction rates are so much higher. And then you think about people who, okay, like those of us who were able to escape the school to prison pipeline, right? Then you look at hiring and then you say to yourself, you know what? Hiring discrimination is no better now than it was 25 years ago, right? And then we know that there are studies that say if you have a Black sounding name, that your chances of getting hired are less, right? So then you have to contend with that. And then if you do get a job, right, you're working. We know
keep going, right?
You're not able to elevate in the organization like somebody who is, right? And then, Sammetria, what happens is then you stressed out and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna go to the doctor. And then I go to the doctor and the doctor is like, oh, you're Black, so you don't feel pain the same way that a white person feels pain, right? And literally your skin is thicker than somebody who's white. And so I'm not gonna prescribe you medicine that you need to be able to go on. And so there are all of these systems that are interconnected. And for me, it's impossible to say, well, it's education, or well, it's this, or well, it's that. It's this whole country is propped up on systems that are racist towards Black people. And so from the beginning to the end, it doesn't matter whichever part of the system that you have to be involved with. Let's say you don't have kids, or you aren't working in corporate America. America has a piece of racism pie for you that they can serve up based on all of the things that are put together.
Yeah, that is a brilliant. I hope everyone heard that. Of course, we're recording, so you can go back and listen. That was just a brilliant walkthrough of how things start with something as simple as home ownership and how that bleeds all the way through, leading up to a potential health issue and what transpires from that. So thank you so much for taking us along that continuum.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's a long thing, but America is a great country in many regards, but I think we also have to be willing to contend with the parts of it that are not great. But Kevin, before you were talking about like seeing racism, and I think that's one of the things that, especially as it relates to wealth and what that means and things operating in the shadows, I really want to point out that so much of these, we have sort of conditioned ourselves and our kids to think that it's about the racism you see, that it's the people dying in the streets, and it is all of those things, but it's the systems of racism that really performed the work of making sure that as a community, we're not able to progress, right? So the racism I see, actually, I prefer the racism you see, right? Like that's the easy stuff. If all we tossing around the N-words and okay. But when you're getting in the way of my education and my health and my ability to move forward, like that's when it gets to be really hard. And I think that's the thing that really hinders us is the systems.
The systems. And then beyond the systems, there's things that we experience on a daily basis, whether they be microaggressions, and that kind of leads all the way to the most severe application of those systems, which people start to use language like economic apartheid, right? In terms of things that we're experiencing. So my next question is, so we've set the stage of what's going on. So let's move into some solutions, right? Some things that we can do. And Kevin, so the next question is for you. You mentioned that we have come a long way, right? That we have important achievements for Black America regarding overcoming these policies. What would you cite as, what in your opinion is the most important achievement, most important thing that we have overcome as a people when it comes to race and economics?
I don't know if we've necessarily overcome anything financially that we didn't already overcome years ago, even before they burnt down Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. I think we're taking a bigger share of the pie. I think you know, I think one of the things we need to focus on moving forward is what do we continue to do to build wealth? And I think during this pandemic, you know, during the times that we're in, I think if we focused on building and funding companies that focused on the necessities of life, like food, shelter, clothing, transportation, I think if we move that direction to where no matter what's going on in the world, you're going to need these resources, I think we'll be fine. I think with globalization, you know, you have Amazon, you have Alibaba, you have different companies out there that are going to kill a lot of the small businesses out there. But there are certain things that we can own. You know, Erika was talking about home ownership, but also I think as a substitute to that is land, whether we're farming. You know, I think farming's not going anywhere. You know, now small farmers are being phased out, but that's a whole nother, you know, conversation because of the subsidies of the government for big farms. But we're always going to need food. We're always going to need shelter. We're always going to need clothing. But it boils down to supporting your Black-owned businesses and making sure that those businesses are actually held accountable. But supporting those businesses. You know, if there's a Black-owned grocery store, Black-owned builder, you know, I see the number of, you know, one of the numbers floating around is we spend $1.3 trillion out there. But you have to keep in mind, some of the largest purchases you'll make in your life, whether it's a house or a car, we don't have any say-so in that. You know, there's not a Black-owned dealership, and by dealership I mean like car maker out there. So that money's going to go. Yeah, so that money's going to go manufacturer. There you go. So that money's going to go to the other side. We don't own that many. We're not a huge percentage of home builders out there or mortgage companies. So that money's going to go to the other side. But once we start moving into the direction of where our money is going, I think we'll be fine. Even you know, the females may get mad at me about this one, but the purses you buy, the shoes you buy, like all the designer, the stuff that you're wasting or spending money on is not owned by us. And then not only that, it's made in China or made somewhere else. So I mean, you're helping increase the wealth gap out there. So I think focusing on, I mean, again, all of us went to a prestigious university, but I also want to teach my young daughter that it's not about just your book smarts, but it's about actually understanding the economy and your street smarts and building wealth, building, you know, starting your own company, starting your own business, understanding how the world is really interconnected and how it works. Because you can get all the degrees you want, but if you don't understand how this world actually works, the interconnection of it, you're just going to get phased out, right? So I think although we have overcome a lot of hurdles, I think in order to continue to make that happen, we just have to focus on spending money in our communities or on businesses that actually support our communities, you know, until we can. For example, the NFL, I think, is a Republican organization, but there's a lot of African Americans that are getting paid a lot of money. I say, take that money from that party that they're going to give to you and invest it back into the community. You know, assuming your community is African American community or the community they may have come from. You know, probably not the same community they live in now, but the community they came from. And so it's just reinvesting money that you gain from these different establishments and putting them back into our businesses.
So you see that as a vehicle for building wealth over time?
Absolutely. I mean, now personally, in order to build wealth, you just have to work on your budget. So the financial advisor in me just says, you know, spend less than what you make, right? Focus on your budget. Don't buy frivolous things. I mean, I don't want to say common sense, but that's just 1 + 1 = 2. If you make 100,000 and you spend 40,000, then you just netted 60,000 that year, right? So now you're building wealth in your community, or you're building wealth, personal wealth, which, you know, if you give back or you pass that down, that works as well. But the big picture, what you do with that wealth, where you spend those funds, where you spend that money, is very important.
Erika, I see you have some reactions to that, some things you may want to say. In that, thanks for putting out the statistic, Kevin. That comes from the most recent numbers. I'll put a link in the comments, but yeah, in case you didn't know, the measure of the Black spending power, that's the metric. The numbers were from 2018. It's $1.3 trillion. And just to give us some context, Texas as a state happens to be one of the top states. Texas alone in the measure of Black spending power is 117 billion. And then from there, you have New York, which is 115 billion. And then you have Maryland, California, Georgia, and Florida, which are all tied between 95 and 96 billion dollars in Black spending power as measured by the folks that put out the study. So those are the numbers that we're talking about. So what are your thoughts about that, Erika? So we heard reinvesting back into the community, back into Black-owned businesses as a wealth creation vehicle. What are your thoughts?
Sammetria, I have a ton to say about what Kevin just shared with us. I'm gonna act like a Baptist preacher. Can you give me a minute? I have a few points. So if you just give me a minute.
Sure, yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to start with the notion of spending power. And I want us to make sure that we go back to its roots and where spending power was created. Spending power, and we recently on our podcast, which is called Brokish, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts or Google or wherever you listen to your podcasts, or visit us at brokish.com. We actually recently interviewed a professor whose name is Jared Ball, and he wrote a book that's called The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, right? So he wrote a book basically as a myth buster to this notion of buying power. But this was essentially in its origin a marketing term, right? So it was created through like Nielsen and their marketing. And really the way that it perpetuated itself in the Black community is that we had some of our own leaders, because sometimes it be your own people, John H. Johnson, right? So John H. Johnson of Ebony and Jet magazine, who we know was a Black media elite, right? And so he's like, I need ad revenue for my magazine. And I know that the white capitalist elite, right, they always want to sell more. So what if I can get my people to buy your stuff, and then we can have sort of what they call this unholy alliance together? And so essentially what happened is John H. Johnson, and there's a video on YouTube that you can watch if you've never seen it. I had only seen it recently, called Selling the Negro. And in that video, John H. Johnson is basically building the case for, no, Black people are good consumers. This is how much they have in income every year. Yes, sir, they will buy your goods. They're respectable people. That is the concept of buying power. But buying power is only the notion of basically them calculating the income that you have in any given year. Now, we all know that the income that you have in any given year cannot be spent on consumables. You need a place to stay, right? You have to pay for that. So there is no, first of all, there is no power in the wealth that Black people have, which is no greater now than it was right after Reconstruction. So when we go back to the concept of, are we better off financially now than we were? No. And in fact, by the latest Federal Reserve Consumer Survey, it tells us that the median Black family has $3,400 in wealth. $3,400 is essentially zero. So that means that half of us essentially have zero, and half of us, yes, have more than that. But our wealth position isn't anymore. So I would encourage everybody to go out and check out Dr. Ball's book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, where he does take us through. And not only was it John H. Johnson at that time, but we can also point to some of our contemporaries to see how they try to bring capital and us together to quell disruption. You can see that with the NFL and their courting of Jay-Z, right? Let's bring him along, and then we can get everybody in line. And there is a long history of this happening. And so that part is not new. So when we talk about buying power, no, it's not about how many bundles or Jordans I buy. It doesn't matter. That is not where my wealth comes from. So the problem is that if you take the top 100 richest people in America, they have more wealth than every Black person in this country. So you could take 100 people, put them in the room, and they have more wealth than all of us. And to the point of land, that's fantastic. Yes, that'd be awesome. We own 1% of the land. We own 1% of the land after Reconstruction. We haven't made any strides in that area. So yes, budgets are awesome. I believe in budgets and all of that. But when the median income of the Black family is like $40,000, you can't budget yourself out of rent that is usually 2/3 of the take-home pay in an average city, right? So it just gets to be it gets to be more complicated than if I spend correctly, if I just monitor what I'm doing, because we as a community don't have anything. And specifically related to, a lot of us on this call went to UT, and I'm happy to share, and I'll put all of the links for where I'm getting my information if anybody is interested. But talk about folks going to UT. If we talk about wealth amounts, right? The wealth of somebody, a Black person who graduated from college, is less than a white person who didn't finish high school, right? So the median wealth of a Black person who graduated from college is $70,000. For a white person, it's like $268,000, and they didn't go to school. So it's like there's this great big wealth disparity that's not based on education. So we found out that education doesn't close the racial wealth gap. We found that starting Black businesses doesn't close the racial wealth gap. The average Black business, 90% of them only have one employee, and that's the person who started the business. You can't transform industries when you have businesses that are created by a single human. And so we love to tell people to start businesses and, quit your day job and go out there and do that. But for a lot of us, employment can be an asset because usually it comes along with healthcare. Whereas I'm going out and starting my business and I'm by myself and I don't have that. So I absolutely believe in Black businesses and that we need to support them, but my Black business has a hard time competing with Amazon, and then we're asking Black people to pay more for our goods than they would if they go to another business, right? So then it gets tricky, because if I only got $3,400 in wealth and then you're telling me to spend more on my stuff, and it gets to be very complicated.
Erika, can I jump in at some point?
I see that, Kevin. I see you're taking notes. You're taking notes, but I do want to just orient where we are.
Can I take a?
Well, just real quick, you've drawn a distinction between spending power and wealth, and you brought our attention to statistics.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's an important distinction in this conversation. So I just want to orient everybody back to where we are. But I see you writing furiously over there, Kevin. So I think you had something to add to.
She talks fast, and so I'm not going to disagree with much of what she said, but I do have some questions. So Erika mentioned that there's no power in the wealth that Black people have. I have to fundamentally disagree with that. Like I don't understand that. Like, so
Kevin, I don't literally mean there's no power. I'm saying we don't have the power that the media, and I think we try to make it seem like in terms of wealth. It just doesn't exist in our community. We don't have it.
Well, I disagree with that as well. So if let's say Tyler, if Tyler Perry, right? I'm just going to name one person because I have 4 other points that you said that I want to get to. But so if Tyler Perry opens up this large studio in Atlanta and hires a ton of Black actors, is that not helping our community generate additional income, additional wealth with just that one business?
It is, but we also have to interrogate the things that are happening. Like our friend Tyler Perry likes to hire non-union actors. Why? Because he don't have to pay them as much. So he's hiring our Black actors. But
Erika, I get you. I get you. You're doing a good job of stating problems, but I want to address some solutions, right? I don't care if he's paying them less, he's paying them more, he's paying them. They're getting a paycheck. You're getting a paycheck. It's better than being unemployed, right? So as long as somebody is deciding to pay you and you're not sitting on the sidelines as a struggling artist, then you're getting a paycheck. So you know, to
me is from a community perspective, if he's not any better than a white capitalist. Like
I just use him as an example. I just use him as one example as a wealthy African American that is making an effort to not only hire more African Americans, but he's also giving back millions in scholarships and a bunch of other stuff that I don't have the data to
it's
state.
Rounding error for him, but yeah, he's doing it.
But I think that's part of the problem. It's a rounding, like it's the percentage more money than a lot of us have given. I don't care if it's 1%, 2%, 3%. Now, okay.
And Kevin, I know you have like 4 points that you want to address with what Erika said.
Can I get the one more?
Go ahead.
Okay, so she also mentioned that the percentage of African American business owners are made up of, I think, one employee. Is that what you said?
20% of Black
one employee. Now, keep in mind, in the economy that we're in, you may not need more than one employee. Warren Buffett only has like literally 5 or 6 employees, and he's one of the wealthiest men on this earth. So you can have 1 or 2 employees, but still run a multi-billion-dollar company.
What is the force behind Warren Buffett? Like,
there can't be an asterisk to everything somebody said. Like, you have to understand. Sammetria, go ahead and take over, Sammetria. Go ahead.
Well, I think the important thing that we're seeing, right, it's important to have, these are the in-depth conversations. First of all, this is not a surface level conversation. So we can agree on that, because now we're actually interrogating, right, what we are looking at to even discuss whether or not it's valuable, whether or not it can even be considered to be wealth, right, for the community. So I think this is the type of conversation that needs to be had. So I appreciate both of the approaches. I would like, though, we're at 6:40. We have like 20 minutes left or so for this discussion. So I would like to shift to solutions, right? So in terms of what we can do, we have on the table a couple examples from Kevin, which says, okay, so we can reinvest back into the Black community. Kevin, you also mentioned that we can maybe start to look at some of the inputs or distribution systems, right? We can start to maybe get into businesses that are more elastic in terms of any sort of shifts in the economy. So Erika, in terms of solutions, what are some things that you see that we can do to sort of move forward, right? We want to become independent of the system, or maybe interdependent. What are your thoughts there?
Solutions, Erika. Solutions, Erika.
So here's the thing. Specifically related to us operating independent of a system, or the American capitalist system. While I don't want to be involved in this American capitalist system, right? We can't strip ourselves away from it. And why do I say that? To the point Kevin made earlier, we don't own the means of production, right? So how can we strip ourselves away when we don't have the means to have clean water for our communities, like to be able to create that? We don't have manufacturing facilities to be able to do that. We don't own all of those things. So
solutions, Erika, solutions.
We're getting to some solutions. We're getting to solutions. Yes. Okay. Please continue, Erika.
Yeah. So in general, however, so because that thing is so complicated, and because this system was built on us failing, which I believe that it was, it's funny that we talk about solutions like they come like this. The problems have been for 400 years, right? We've been talking about 1619 problems, but we want a solution today. So anyway, let me tell you what my one word solution is. There are some other things, but my one word solution is reparations, right?
Okay.
To sort of lean into what I mean by that. First of all, let me put reparations in a context beyond what I think people normally think of. While I do believe that, yes, we Black people are owed for the things that happen to us, just like reparations have been paid to other communities within this country. So America has paid reparations to the Jewish community. Americans have paid reparations to our friends in the Asian community, right? So that term is not foreign to us. But yes, so financial reparations, a check, but I also think reparations needs to be a part of a multi-generational plan because the harm was multi-generational. And for me, that includes access to free healthcare, right? So I hope that all Americans get free healthcare, but I also think that as a part of a reparations package, Black people should get free healthcare. I don't think that Black people should have to pay taxes, for example. I think that if we want to go to institutions of higher education, that should be free. All of these things for some amount of time. And before we talk about how improbable the idea of reparations is, I'd like to just point us to 2 months ago when out of the clear blue sky, we found $7 trillion to be able to try to prop up the economy. No word about the national debt, what it would do. And we pulled it under the couch covers and said, y'all, we got $7 trillion. And so my suggestion is pull out the other half of the couch cushions and get the $7 trillion and offer up the reparations that I think we're due. But beyond reparations, right? When we talk about solutions, ultimately, and this is where things get super radical, I think it does require a dismantling of the capitalist system, right? So I think it requires a radical politic in order for us to get reparations. That is what I don't think that we can say that we want to be successful in a system that is built for us to lose. Capitalism requires a loser, and guess what? Black people are your losers.
What's the radical view? Like when you say dismantle it, what do you mean?
I mean, dismantle capitalism through a lot of different things that you're starting to hear more about now, right? So we know that with the political environment that reparations did sort of come to the forefront during some of the debates on the Democratic side. So definitely that part. The radical view I'm talking about is a move away from capitalism and leaning into other ways that we can form our society. Some of those things also deal with abolitionist movements, right? So I think that there is this groundswell of how do we change everything, disrupt all of it, start over, right? Because I think we need a do-over as it relates to America and this economy. And I say this as somebody who, by all estimates, has been able to benefit from it, right? Like I say this as somebody, to give you an example, to be in the top 1% of wealth for Black people, you need $1.5 million. White people is $12 million to be in the top 1%, right? So I come to you as somebody who has been able to financially achieve many of the things that other Black people have not, but I understand that it's not about me and my individual progress, it's about my community that I care so much about. So if capitalism is meant for all of us, most of us, with the exception of some unicorns, you know, folks like me and Kevin, I want it to be success for more than just us, right? I want it to be success for everybody. And so that's why I don't think the current environment can uphold that or wants to. I think capitalism doesn't want us to win.
Erika, do you think that we, as just real quick, do you think that we can, that the Black community can build that system, build that model independent of the current system? Like within the community?
I don't know how. I don't know. So with the, seriously, again, and I know Kevin doesn't believe me, but if you look at the wealth numbers, we just don't have it. So bring us all together and add up all our money and we just don't have it, right? And I'm talking about wealth. I'm not talking about income, because I think I can give you a whole nother 15 minutes about a lot of us are masquerading as middle class and we're working class, because we're really not. We don't have the wealth to be able to prop up what I think it takes to be middle class. But like all of those things going on, I don't know how we do that without coordination and collaboration from other people in this country. And so I don't necessarily advocate for a Black America that is separate from America, right? So I really hope for a situation where we can get America to, and again, however improbable, to really be able to turn itself around and want to fully include us as a part of the dream.
All right.
Wow.
Kevin.
So
I saw you pull out a folder also. You have a folder of
paper.
No.
He needs a drink, but he didn't know. He didn't have a drink, so he, you know.
I had some H2O. So Erika, I just want clarification though. You want to disrupt the capitalist system in America, but you have to realize in a globalized economy, it's not just about America. So you want America to be kumbaya without like China and Russia and Africa and
no, I didn't say that.
They're still going to be operating in a very capitalist type way. Like everything we have in our homes were probably made in China.
Way, right? Like I think that there are other systems that exist in the world outside of the one we have created here. And I think it's possible for us to operate in a system that's different and still be plugged into the global economy. So I didn't intend to mean that at all.
How do we be plugged in? Like it sounds like, and I'm not being funny here or facetious, it sounds like you want to live in like a kumbaya like society where everybody's just sharing the wealth and all this. And even though that does happen in other places of the world in very smaller communities, that wouldn't be.
I don't know how we got to me saying we want to share all. That's not what I'm trying to say, Kevin. What I'm trying to say is I do envision a world where we don't have people who have billions of dollars and people who are houseless. I do think that there can be a world where we have people who are not billionaires and people who don't have to go bankrupt paying for their health care. I do envision a world where all of these things can be true at the same time. And I think the trick of capitalism is to make us think one individually, right? And that it's all about me. And what I'm willing to say as Erika is that yes, if I'm willing to sacrifice my job, I'm willing to sacrifice my things. I want a community where more of us, right, are doing better than a few of us. And today we only have a few, and I'm not interested in that. And I don't want that. And I don't care how rich the top 1% and the 10% are.
Were those your views before you had money or after you had money? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean,
and the reason why I say that, and before you answer that, I'm not trying.
You don't have any money.
Well, before you answer that, I'm not trying to say that in a demeaning way. I'm saying it's easier to say that once you're living comfortably, to say, I want everybody to win. But when you're at the bottom and you're hustling, you are looking out for self because you're trying to like get yourself out of whatever environment that you're
yourself. And you know, I'm not talking about people who are struggling when I say that. I'm talking about Black capitalists when I say that. I'm talking about Black capitalists from the perspective of Black folks who are really hustling, not in terms of I'm just trying to make it, but I'm trying to be Tyler Perry, or, you know, I want to be the next mogul or something. And to sort of—
good or bad? Is that good or bad to be the next Tyler Perry?
It's fine.
I don't think you're making I think it's neutral. I think you're just using those as examples, right?
It just doesn't benefit the community in the way that causes the transformation that I would like to see.
And I disagree.
And
I fundamentally disagree. I think if a bunch of young people want to be the next Tyler Perry or Oprah or whoever,
they should be.
And they become that, like, I want you to shoot for the stars. If you become that and you do the same amount that he's done for the community, I think that helps us.
So we have two opposing views here. So with the 10 minutes we have left, I'm gonna ask both of you, what's the next step, right? So in the world that you envision, Erika, what is the next practical step to get to where you are proposing we should go to create and sustain Black wealth? Is it at the ballot box, right? Like, is it through voting? Is it through demanding more from our elected officials? What is the next step? And then Kevin, same thing for you. So after she answers, same thing for you. What is the next practical step to maybe reinvesting in the community? So we've established the two separate views. Of course, I'm in the middle, right? So now let's go to what is the next step, next practical step for the world that we're talking about.
And I don't know that there's a single next step, but I'll say a few things. I think, first of all, it's really important, and the work, a lot of the work that we do on the podcast is just helping to educate people. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we have become so well propagandized in this country that we believe that Black people are doing better than they are, and the numbers just don't bear it out. So my first wish is just for everybody to know where we are from a wealth perspective, from an income perspective, in terms of any strides in home ownership or all of the things that people talk about. Let's get in the numbers and let's figure out what they really tell us. And I think, first of all, people will be surprised about what they learn, because again, the American propaganda machine is one of the most well created ones in the world. And there is some good propaganda going on in this world. So that's the first thing. Where are we? And let's know that, and let's recognize that. I think another step is absolutely, and this is where I do agree with Kevin, I think we need to vote based on a policy or what your platform is. I am not I'm voting one party all this because I'm a member of that party. Mm-hmm. I'm all about what are the policies. Now, I will tell you this, my policies are 100% on the liberal side, right? Whether that's from a financial or personal perspective. But if that means for me that I sit out an election because I'm not voting against people, I only vote for people, then I'm willing to do that, right? So I want to know what your policies are. I want to know what you're doing in my community in terms of, if you care about reparations, do you care about universal health care? What do you think about student loan debt relief? Like, all of these things I care about. And so I vote based on not me and how I can get richer, because that would probably make me vote Republican, right? Like in a lot of different areas, especially financially. But that's not, I'm not voting for Erika, I'm voting for my community, right? So I think voting has its place, but I think that we should put less influence on national elections and more influence on local elections, right? If we talk about our kids and why Kevin's friend didn't know about the right history of slavery, maybe if he had a school board that could help to influence some of those things, right? He could have been able to learn those things. And some of that stuff happens at the local and the state levels more than it does at the national ones. So I think, yes, that can be really important. And I also think that we have to just take it easy on ourselves. I think in a capitalist society where we're going through a freaking pandemic and a racial awakening in this country, it's easy for us to beat ourselves up and wonder why we can't do this and we don't have that. And it's like, you don't have that because there are 400 years that were put between us to help us to keep from getting that, right? So I don't think the solutions are simple. If the solutions were simple, then we'd have them. And so I think it's naive to try to distill it down to a few, but there you go.
All right.
All right. I know
Kevin,
we're
last 5 minutes, Kevin.
I know we're pressed for time. I do want to start with saying Erika and I agree on more points than we don't agree on. I definitely agree with all of her stats that she started with. I think her stats are relevant and they're good for conversations. Those are conversations that need to be had and understood in order for us to affect change. I do agree with that. I also agree as it relates to local voting. I think voting is also key. The reparations thing, I'm not disagreeing with you. I just don't know if that's going to get us to where we need to get to during my lifetime, during my lifetime or during my daughter's lifetime, right? So I do think education is key. I do want our young African Americans to continue to strive to reach for the stars, to be the next Oprah or Tyler Perry. And if they fall short, they'll still be amazing. And I do think that they will look to hire more African Americans because I think this next generation is very woke, so to speak. And I know there's great things to come. But again, I think we have more in common than we differ. If they do hand out reparations, I would love to handle the casino part of that. That part. I'm all for everything else you said, but no, realistically, I mean, this is a conversation that's deserves more time than what's been allotted. But I think everything you and I have said here will start great conversations and dialogue and possibly have a 2.0 to this conversation. But that's it. Just continue to educate yourself and shoot for the stars.
And Shaniqua is back to usher us into our open Q&A. But thank you guys, wonderful debate. I did feel like saying objection sustained a couple times, but I'll refrain from
on Kevin's side, huh?
Well, I won't be able to say that. But Shanika, I think we're going to move into our Q&A, and there's already some questions that have been thrown up in the chat, and I think also the Q&A. So we'll let you guys facilitate that.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
Shanika, you're on mute, but while you're finding your way off mute, start with me, because I can keep my question brief, and I can keep, Erika on the other hand, she means well.
So this is what we're going to do moving forward for the Q&A, because we have a lot of questions from Facebook. We have questions from the question and answers, as well as through the chat. So I'm going to throw them out for everyone, as well as Sammetria. Please join in. If it looks like you're running long, I may wrap you up. So please be aware of that. And I don't mean anything from a rude, I'm not trying to be rude. So the first question that we actually had was from Angela Alston. And she said, the most important thing someone can do in terms of building wealth is to own their home. What can we do to help more of us Black folks cross the threshold of home ownership? I'll put that to everyone.
Can I just say one thing in relation to what she said? So it is true that today, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to say nothing.
No, I said quickly, but go ahead.
So first of all, it's true that most Black people and Black families own their wealth in their home, right? So I won't say it's like the most important thing that we can do in wealth building, but I will say that most of the wealth that we tend to have exists in our home. And in terms of being able to buy a home, of course, it's all the basic things that you hear, right? Like making sure that you're able to get your credit to a certain place, right? Making sure that you're able to build whatever nest egg you'll need for all of the things that come along with home ownership. Because I think we throw it around like own a home. And then people are like, well, my air conditioner broke, now what I'm going to do, because that's going to cost me $4,000. And so I think we need to be realistic that not everybody needs or wants to be a homeowner, and that's okay. So I think that it can be an important vehicle, but for me, it is not the end all be all, because everybody shouldn't be a homeowner. In my opinion, everybody doesn't want to be a homeowner.
Kevin, Sammetria?
I agree with Erika. Not everyone wants to be a homeowner. I think that I think one of the things I wrote down earlier is let's not confuse wealth with just financial gain and what you have in your bank account. I think health is also important. And so as a community, we also need to focus on our mental health, because regardless of how much money you have, you could still be mentally or physically unhealthy. And all the money in the world does nothing for either one of those. So I think we should also focus on health as well as wealth. But I agree with Erika on that point.
I would say I think home ownership is great. It's a great goal. If that's not something that you are pushing for, there are other ways to invest in real estate, right? So if we take it broader to investing in real estate, that which could also be commercial properties, there are a lot of other vehicles and a lot of other things that can be done. Also, there are perhaps opportunities for us to pool money together to invest in real estate, which takes care of some of the issues that Kevin was raising with the lack of having control over inputs, right? So if we bring money together and we're investing in real estate from even a commercial standpoint, then things could, that's a different path to using real estate as the vehicle to building wealth. But sometimes home ownership in and of itself isn't going to get us there. I think we need to look a little bit broader than that.
Okay, another question I was asked was, how can we as African Americans continue the current trend of supporting or investing in Black-owned businesses as a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach? Anyone?
I just think we have to be intentional. We just have to be intentional. I try to annually take a look at where I'm spending my money. To me, where I spend money is equivalent to how I vote. So I believe I vote with my money. So I take a look at where I'm spending money. And for me, it's when we say Black-owned businesses, it's not just like the products, consumer goods manufacturers or those folks. I'm also looking at my service providers, right? Who's my accountant? Who's my attorney? Who is my accountant? Who is my dentist? Who is my social media manager? Who are the people that I'm working with? And I try to make sure that the people that I'm working with represent my values, which also include a high number of women-owned and women-led businesses. So I just think you have to be intentional. One of the things I wanted to bring up was, I'm sure you guys saw that Netflix put 100 million of their dollars into Black-owned bank. I thought that was interesting because a week and a half ago, I said, Sammetria, how much of your money is in a Black-owned bank? I had to ask myself that question. Right. And, lawyers, we don't ask questions that we don't know the answer to. So I knew the answer to that question when I asked it for myself, but that's being intentional. And I had to think about, okay, what am I doing personally? So be intentional. Yeah. That's my answer.
And I think being intentional and technology is also helping a lot of Black-owned businesses. I have a Black-owned business, Urban Events Global and Black Travel Tube. And I intentionally name my businesses so that they are Black-owned, Black Travel Tube, like TUBE, and then Urban Events Global. Because one, a lot of sponsors that I work with actually respect the fact that I put that out there, that I'm not trying to be something I'm not, to pander to a different audience. Not only is my staff all Black, but all of our events are open to the public, but they're 90% Black or minorities. But yeah, technology has definitely helped a lot, with getting the word out about who we are. I found other businesses through different Black-owned business directories on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, on different, it's a lot easier now than it was in the past to find a Black-owned business. So there's really no excuse. If you want to do business with a Black-owned company, you can. Of course, there are several things that we don't own, like major airlines and stuff like that. But for the most part, we should be able to find people that meet our criteria. Even like the Facebook group that I started, Shaniqua, with the Black Mental Health Group, that's for Black mental health professionals in the community that want to promote their services. So yeah.
That's actually a good segue to the next question. So the next question from, I think is Javante Johnson is, do you believe buying Black means spending dollars with Black-owned businesses regardless of the spread in cost and or quality? I know that you had kind of, I think, touched upon that a little bit earlier, Erika. So does buying Black impact the quality of business that we're having, the quality of goods? Should that even factor into our decision to buy Black?
I don't think quality is an issue as it relates to Black business. I think Black businesses have the same level of quality. I think we are able to maintain our businesses in such a way that that is not even an issue. So I'll sort of set that to the side. But one of the things I want to point out in terms of Black businesses, again, I try to go out of my way, like Sammetria talked about, being intentional to support Black businesses. But again, to the point of capitalism and how the system moves, Black businesses are supported, you know, unless we're talking about services. When you're talking about goods, the t-shirts come from China, right? All the goods are still coming from somewhere else. And so, yes, we're propping up those business owners, but we're still ultimately propping up the American capitalist society, right? So it's not, it is impossible for us to maintain our dollars in the Black community. If you've seen that little Killer Mike show on Netflix where he tries to do that for a day, like you can't get out of your yard, right? Just trying to spend your money in the Black community, because we don't own all of the means of production and all those other things. But I do think that it is important to do the best that you can in terms of supporting Black businesses.
And I think also, Shanika, I think the foundation of that question is, should we buy Black if it's more expensive and the quality happens to be inferior? And I would say you still have to be a good steward of your money and of your finances. And if that business isn't meeting the standard, then you may have to spend your money elsewhere. But for the most part, give it a fair shot.
Okay. We have a question from Facebook. We're trying to say a great way to build generational wealth is through life insurance. Do you agree with that? And why do we not speak out about life insurance in our community?
So
because I see one more GoFundMe.
I want to touch on that one because I've done several posts about that. And as you personally know, but I don't know if everyone knows, I used to work for AIG, a very large life insurance company, and I worked for Pacific Life.
That also used to insure slaves. But anyway, that's a completely...
Right. Well, yeah. American General is technically the AIG life insurance, but that's a whole different. Yeah. But at this point, every company out there has probably done something in slavery. But Chauncey brings up a good point. Life insurance is not a sexy conversation. It's not stuff that people typically want to talk about because African Americans don't traditionally talk about their finances around the kitchen table or with one another. So that's part of the roadblock or hurdle, is that we don't talk about finances. I'm a firm believer in life insurance. Again, I've sold life insurance. I've worked with life insurance companies for years. And so very good point.
As a wealth builder. So not just the concept of insurance, but you believe in insurance as a wealth vehicle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, let's say you find a life insurance policy, and I'll keep this short, that's only $150 a month in premiums. But when you pass away, you're passing on $500,000 to your beneficiaries. That's more than you would have saved over that 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now, from an economic standpoint, there's the opportunity cost of what you can do with those funds as well. But that's not a bad start, as life insurance is part of your complete financial bracket.
And I would just add to that, beyond life insurance, insurance in general, right? So if you have certain type of businesses that are high risk, depending on what you are doing, having insurance that insures against liability, for instance, could also be, I won't say it's a vehicle for wealth creation, it's more of a protector of the wealth that you are trying to build. So I'm a proponent of insurance beyond life insurance, business insurance. There's all sorts of insurance policies that you can get to be able to protect your businesses. So for instance, if you are a photographer and you shoot on location and you do destination weddings and you're running around with $10, $15, $20, $25,000 worth of photography equipment and you have assistants and all these other people coming around, sure, I can help you with some sort of contract, but at the end of the day, you need insurance to insure against the risk of there being damage to that $25,000 worth of equipment that you have. So that's an example that I use as to why insurance in general is important. You break a camera lens, that's $5,000, right? So now you have a cash flow issue for $5,000 when if you had an insurance policy on your equipment, you have a different type of a situation when something goes wrong. So in my world, I'm always trying to mitigate risk. So beyond life insurance, insurance in general can be a good way to protect your wealth.
And not only that, from a business standpoint, from a buy-sell agreement, or just from, let's say, for example, Erika and I go into business together and she's an artist, she's a painter, and I'm the accountant, but we own the business 50-50. If something happens to her, then our business is gone because I'm just the accountant. She's the actual artist. But if our business funded a life insurance policy that pays back to the business, I'm able to pay her her family out
Her family.
her share, which may be $1 million, and I could use the rest of that money to help keep the business going and find another artist. There's a bunch of ways to use life insurance from a business continuation standpoint that is worth its own 2-hour, 3-hour call. But there are many. If you're a dentist and you can insure your hands, because if something happens to your hands, then everything you've built and went to school for, you can no longer do. So you can actually insure your hands. So insurance is more than just a term policy, Aflac commercial, or Geico. There's many different wealth building ways to help, mitigate liability, but also build wealth and just protect your business.
Okay. Our next question is from Stephanie Etienne. Other cultures, races make it their business to support each other financially and socially, which translates to the overall betterment of their communities. How can we overcome the crabs in a barrel mentality that has been detriment to our race for generations? Anyone?
I don't believe it. I don't believe that we are crabs in a barrel. I think that a lot of, again, to this concept of propaganda, I think that we believe many things about ourselves that are not true. I think we believe that we waste our money, that we are not good stewards. I think these are all things that we say anecdotally, and I don't think we have evidence to prove that they are true, right? So I don't subscribe to the notion that Black people are crabs in a bucket any more than anybody else.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, next question. Oh, Kevin, did you want to say something? You want to jump in?
No, her last sentence threw me off. She said any more than anyone else. So yes, I believe
I think she's speaking to the capitalist system, the individualistic capitalist system.
Right. Up until that last
mentality.
Up until that last sentence, her last sentence made it better.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for judging Erika's last sentence. So
sustained.
Right. For those that are parents, what are the money and wealth lessons you all are teaching or want to teach your kids?
Budgeting and not living above your means and budgeting. I think I've managed a lot of clients early in my career from 01 to probably 08. And budget was the main thing. I knew people who made 100,000, but they spent 95,000 a year. So you were just as broke as the person who made 40,000 and spent 35,000 that year. It's budgeting. That it's plain and simple. Budgets.
Okay.
In my opinion. Go ahead, Erika.
Yeah. So again, I want my kids to know the truth about Black people and money, right? Black people and wealth and where we are. So we talk about that. And then just as a practical matter, my husband has a business. And so I have enlisted my daughter to do his bookkeeping, right? So I'm teaching her how to manage his books. What does it mean for him to have, inflows and outflows? And she creates the invoices and all of that, because I want her to be exposed to that and what that means. And so for me, it's very practical things, right? So when they talk about they want something, we talk about, well, how are you going to make it happen, right? Where are you going to get the money from? And so I don't think it has to, I think it's a consistent conversation, right, that you have with your kids. And it's the little things, it's the big things. I think it's just always framing it around, how does this affect us? If we do this, what's the trade-off?
Okay.
Which is a long way of saying budgeting. Inflows, outflows. I got you.
She touched on a lot of things, that the fact that she does have her daughter literally currently working right now.
Yeah, it's very practical.
Not only from a budgeting standpoint, but she's in effect a partner in this business. So, and then
she's like a partner, so we don't want to.
I was gonna say, well, actually, if she's a partner, then that means that okay.
Yeah,
I would say I would answer that question by coming at it from a different perspective. So the budgeting and the practical aspects of it, absolutely. But the message that I try to speak to kids, young folks about the most actually deals with intellectual property. Why? Because intellectual property is monetizing your creativity. So I think that in terms of this education process that we need to go through as a people, part of that is to understand that you can literally use the ideas and thoughts that come out of your mind to create wealth. And that a lot of the companies that we see, particularly in the consumer goods world, they're protected by patents, right? So there is a lot that can be done with creativity as a wealth creation vehicle. So whenever I get a chance to talk to any young kids, I try to teach them about and talk to them about intellectual property, because there's a lot of wealth, a lot of money, a lot that can be done when you understand the value of what comes out of your brain, and that it's protectable by law, US and international law.
So that actually, this is my own personal question. And so just as a caveat, I think I started in the beginning and I told you guys that Sammetria, I've been a client of hers with my business, and she's worked as my attorney. And one of the key things that you told me, even when it came to intellectual property, was just one of the programs that I created for a client. And you was like, you really would like, this is versus them paying you this literally was worth $20,000, $30,000. And so that shifted my mindset from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And so this question actually is for you, and then also for the other panelists. But our race, our culture, we are wealth generators just based on what we do and who we are. So as you just alluded to, the intellectual property, how we dress, how we speak, the music we listen to. So beyond, well, maybe not even beyond, I'd leave it open-ended. How can we protect that and have that become a part of generational wealth creation within our community?
The first step is just to realize what it is, right? So for copyright, for instance, we create copyrights on a daily basis. So understanding that every time you create content that's protected via copyright, that shifts your mindset in terms of what you do. It shifts your mindset in terms of types of conversations you have. You might not get into as many collaborations with people without having the proper paperwork, because you'll be aware that they can take your idea and run with it. And you just start to think about what you create differently. So that's the first step. Whenever I walk someone through how copyright works, there's a light bulb that goes on. I can literally see it in their mind, like, oh, wait a minute, I can make money. Oh, I can protect that. Yes. And then we get into not only can you protect the copyright now, but that lasts for your life plus 75 years. Now, what does that mean? That means that after you pass away, if you protect things properly, your family members can now benefit off of royalties, residuals, all sorts of things based on something that you created while you were alive. And so in terms of even passing down the fruits of what you can make from intellectual property, it becomes a long range game, really. It can go to generation to generation if you manage it properly. So I think just understanding intellectual property and understanding that what you create has value helps you negotiate better. There are deal points you will not accept. You'll walk into meetings differently. Your entire posture changes once you understand the value of what you create.
Okay. Next question. Scholarships for African Americans versus the traditional concept of reparations. One's level of education often influences economic power. So what are your thoughts on that, Erika? Since you literally talked about reparations more than anyone else.
And when I talked about reparations, I actually talked about university education as a being part of that, right? Like if that's what you want to do, higher education being a part of a reparations package. And I absolutely think that it should be. And for me, the question is not about this or that. The question is about all the different things, right? I think that it should span a bunch of different categories. And so higher education absolutely should be one of those categories. The unfortunate truth about America is that, again, having higher levels of education if you are a Black person doesn't result in the same economic benefit that it does if you are a white person. That's just the truth of this country. Of course, I think people should go to school, and I don't think that we should be hindered by that. But I think it's just important to know that we just don't benefit from education in the same way. There's also this study that I would encourage everybody to go read if you have a chance, called Things We Get Wrong About Closing the Racial Wealth Gap. And it talks about a lot of the different areas that we traditionally think are vehicles for us to close the racial wealth gap, which, yes, are good things and can help us to build individual wealth. But as we look at wealth from a community perspective, just doesn't necessarily do it.
Okay, does anyone else want to give feedback to that before I move to the next question? No? Okay, the looks on your faces. Okay, so July 7th has been named Blackout Day, a day that encourages economic boycotting, a time to support Black-owned businesses and halt spending on other non-Black businesses. What do you think of this Blackout Day, and what do you think will be the outcome?
As much as I would love, as the owner of a Black-owned business, as much as I would love for people to spend money on Black-owned businesses that day, uh, conceptually it sounds good, but whatever you don't buy that day, you're probably going to buy the next day. So you're still going to end up spending money with the same people. Um, I, I don't think it's going to make a dent in the economy. I don't think it will be noticed actually, but I like it. I like it conceptually. I think it's a good start. Because if you start with one day, maybe you'll spend money on Black-owned businesses 2 days, and then 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. So it doesn't hurt, but I don't think it's going to be a blip on the radar. It's not going to be on, on Wall Street. There's not going to be a dip in the stock market.
Okay. Anyone else? Next question. Okay. Is the mentality of getting a paycheck, as Kevin said, one of the reasons Black people don't build wealth?
No. So again, I think that everybody can't be the owner of a business, because then who's working at the businesses, right? Like if everybody goes out and is like, screw it, we all quitting our jobs, we're gonna own our own business, who's gonna do the work? Like especially as a person who goes to a job every day, right? Like there are also, again, a 9 to 5 can bring about a certain level of stability that you don't necessarily get from being a business owner. And so again, I'm married to a business owner, so I see both sides of this equation, right? In terms of owning your own business and then working a 9 to 5 job. Everybody's just not built for that, right? So I don't think we should try to make it be like everybody is built for that. It's okay to have a 9 to 5 job. You can have a 9 to 5 job and you can manage to build some measure of wealth with that. You can also have a business and do the same thing. And I think we want people to be like one thing, like let's all do this one thing. And one thing doesn't work for everybody.
Okay. I have 2 questions from one of the steering committee members. What will make a dent in the economy? Kevin, you kind of referenced that Blackout Day may not necessarily do it. It wouldn't necessarily even be a blimp when it comes to Wall Street. So what will make a dent in the economy? And so it's 2-part. What is our bus boycott look like? What does our bus boycott look like in 2020? So civil rights era, there was the bus boycott. It was effectual. So what is it that we can do right now that makes a lasting imprint from being Black in America, but then also from an economic standpoint? So 2-part question, throw that out there.
Erika, you want to take that one first?
I have some thoughts, Kevin, but I'll defer to you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So especially to the points that Kevin made earlier about globalization and the fact that we have been put into this position where as a Black community in general, again, if you add us all up, we don't have a lot of wealth. Our position doesn't move the needle in terms of the overall economy in the way that it did in times past, right? Like our lives were more well connected to white lives before, right? Because we were living in homes, we were taking care of people's children, we were, doing literally involved in those lives in different ways. But now if it turns out that we don't want to work and we don't want to spend money, you know what? We have friends and cousins all around the world who can jump in and fill the void for us. So it becomes harder for us to have an impact within the realm of globalization, right? It becomes harder for us to have a bus boycott because our collective power gets weakened as we look at the economy through a global lens.
Okay. Kevin, do you have anything to add? Sammetria?
I agree with her from a globalization standpoint. I mean, African Americans make up less than 15% of the US. Globally, that number just gets fractionally smaller. So our impact, I mean, it's almost like voting on a local level. I just say stop spending money on brands that don't support us. That's it.
Okay. There was a question directly for you, Sammetria, and I'll leave it to you how you may want to answer it. When we were talking about voting earlier, someone did ask the question, what was your perspective on voting?
My perspective on voting is that you should always vote. So I would disagree with Erika in terms of like when to vote or how to vote, and the concept of voting against someone versus voting for them. To give you some context, my great-grandfather was a person who registered people to vote in Washington County in Texas, way back when, right after the Civil War. So voting for my family is really important. I grew up with not just my grandparents, but 3 of my great-grandparents. Not voting was not an option. So I had the opportunity to actually speak with people who had seen and had heard and had experienced firsthand all that was done and all that was sacrificed for us to be able to vote. And indeed, I've early voted this week. And every time I go vote, I actually have my registration card with me, and I just have it with me, and I look at it and I say, this is what great-grandparents were doing. I think it's incredibly important. We can get into all sorts of discussion about the voter ID laws. We can get into discussions about gerrymandering. Election law is one of my favorite areas of law besides intellectual property. So we could have that conversation. But at the end of the day, I believe that you should vote. Just educate yourself on who you want to vote for and then go from that. But it comes from my own personal family experience and history with voting. I mean, I grew up watching my great-grandmother go to the polls and vote even when she was disabled and couldn't walk. Okay. So that's how I feel about voting.
Okay. And with that, that will be the last question. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure I give enough time to be able to thank you all. We did have a couple of questions that were left unasked. And I had a lot of feedback about this particular panel, and someone even said that Kevin mentioned 2.0. So who knows what the future may bring? You know, there may be the opportunity for you all to join us again. And hopefully you'll be open to that. I will say, Erika, someone did ask for one of the books that you had mentioned. So if you can make sure to give us the name of the books or the resources that you've alluded to while you're speaking so that we can make sure to share that with everyone, I would love to do that. For me personally, I know that this invitation was something that I sent out to each of you from a personal standpoint, because I do have a relationship with each of you. So I want to say thank you so much for this lively discussion. And I knew that it was going to be as such. I know each of you, I know your personalities. I have a small amount of an opinion or insight when it comes to your viewpoint. And I really didn't think that there was going to be anyone else that was going to be able to better not only moderate this, but to be able to be panelists. Hi, Avery.
Oh, here we go.
So thank you so much for doing this and giving us, donating your time. I am an entrepreneur, so I do want to make sure that I stress this to those that are watching. Each of the individuals that are here, even though Erika said that she doesn't necessarily own her own business and that her husband is a business owner, she does have a broadcast brokerage. Please, by all means, it's on various platforms. Make sure that you download it and listen to the podcast so that you can be educated. Kevin is an entrepreneur. Urban Events Global. Go to Facebook. He has several different events that take place across the globe, locally as well as internationally. So make sure that you do support him. Sammetria, I can personally attest to, is an excellent attorney, and she will review all of your contracts and help you. So I can personally, again, speak for her. So by all means, we're going to make sure at the end of this that we share their contact information and how you can plug into their respective businesses. I want to make sure to thank Tamika Sattler and Evelyn Brothers, my cohorts when it comes to being on the steering committee with this. This really just came from Evelyn texting me one night at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the morning and tagging me in the best group that we have to do something. And so from there, reached out to Tamika, and we just knew that, hey, this was an opportunity for all of us to get together as former students and as alum at UT. So this was an opportunity. So I want to make sure that I definitely thank them. Did I forget anything, Tamika or Ev? The next one will be on July 16th. That's going to be race and or equality. And looking forward. And then after that, we're going to have an encore presentation. There's going to be more information coming for that. But did I forget anything before I sign off, Ev and Tamika? You all could just chime in. No?
think you covered everything. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. Well, then, if that's the case, I'm going to sign off how Ev did last week. So y'all ready? Goodbye and good luck.
Welcome.
Y'all, welcome.